Well, welcome to all of the Gray Muzzle grantees that are joining in today, either live or via recording. I'm Denise Fleck. I'm the board president of the Gray Muzzle organization, and I'm delighted to be here today kicking off this webinar on conflict resolution and mediation, handling disagreements among shelter employees and volunteers. And I have a feeling we might be able to translate some of this to our own households too, because, we're getting into that crazy time of year where we may need to resolve some conflicts amongst family members as well. But I'm particularly delighted to be able to introduce our presenter today. I must tell you, another one of our board members actually was going to host this webinar, and he had a work conflict, and he is so bummed that he doesn't get to introduce Kelly because everybody loves Kelly. So let me tell you a little bit about her first. Kelly Chicos is a corporate professional with strengths in people development, public speaking, facilitation, change management, engagement and retention, diversity and inclusion, coaching and mentoring assessments, and I could just go on and on and on. Her values, which I can attest to, include compassion, working hard, helping others, accountability, transparency, and gosh darn it, having fun while remaining professional. And her professional motto is make it amazing. Well, I can personally attest to the fact that everything Kelly touches does turn out to be amazing. Kelly's been a board member of the Gray Muzzle organization for the past 3.5 years, so I have certainly seen her in action. She also makes things fun and adds her own personal zest to grant videos and GMO events that the staff, board, and donors have all enjoyed over the years. Kelly has held the position of vice president of the board and is currently our secretary. But one of the many things I adore about Kelly Chicos is that she is a lifelong animal advocate with a soft spot for seniors. For more than 2 decades, Kelly has volunteered in various capacities for many shelters and rescues, fostered more than 30 pets, adopted nearly 20. We all know about those foster fails, but I have a feeling most of us know when we go in that this is going to be a keeper. And she's also helped animals after natural disasters. Kelly is a former CEO at her local humane society and founded a pet retail shop aimed at raising money and awareness for animal rescues. So everyone here is in great company with Kelly because she can appreciate the shoes that all of you are wearing in rescue and can relate to many of your challenges. Fortunately, I'm lucky it's only 1 o'clock because my clock's about to chime and there'll only be one ding. There we go. Sorry about that. Should have thought about turning that off. But as you all likely know, conflicts and disagreements are a natural part of any work environment, including animal shelters, where the stakes are often high and the workers are passionately committed. So let's all sit back and listen to Kelly tell us how to better handle these situations.
Oh,
Here's Kelly.
thank you so much, Denise, for such a wonderful introduction. I hope I can live up to a fraction of the expectations you set. But thank you again. That was really lovely. And good afternoon or good morning for some of you. I'm so glad that you're here today. I'm very delighted to be your facilitator. As Denise said, I've been in both shoes of volunteers and employees for animal rescue organizations. So like many of you, you know what it's like to sit on either side. And so this course is specifically designed for the compassionate individuals who make a difference in the lives of animals, animal welfare employees, and animal welfare volunteers. And so when we talk about conflict today, we might be talking about conflict between employees or between volunteers or some sort of combination. So we're going to give several examples today, but just know that they're all interchangeable. When people are involved, there is going to be conflict, and that's not a bad thing in and of itself. It's when that it is unhealthy conflict that we want to resolve quickly and effectively. So I'm glad that you're all here today. We would love to make this as interactive as possible, so please feel free to drop your questions in chat anytime that you want to bring something up. And Denise definitely has permission to interrupt me at any point, and we can go ahead and take questions as they come in. So by the end of our webinar today, I want to make sure that all of you attending live or listening later will leave here with an understanding of the root causes of conflict. You'll recognize conflict styles and responses, and talk about how we can create a positive shelter culture. Or if you already have one, fantastic. How do you maintain that positive shelter culture? Because that can ultimately prevent a lot of conflicts, and we want to be proactive whenever possible. And then we want to spend the majority of our time today reviewing practical tools, because I'm a big fan of, I love information, I love getting a background of things, but when it comes down to it, your time is valuable and training is valuable if you get to take away some nuggets of information and some tools that you can use right away. So that's the goal today. We'll also review a couple case studies, and just so we can bring all that information home. All right, so let's start off briefly talking about, where does conflict come from? Where does it start? I mentioned a minute ago that not all conflict is bad. It's only unhealthy conflict that can be dangerous or destructive. But healthy conflict is actually very expected in our environments, any work environment, and healthy conflict can result in improved relationships, shared understanding, better processes, new ideas, and all of that. But today we're going to focus on the unhealthy conflict. So where does it come from? Well, I'll tell you where numero uno, top of the list, the big chart topper of where it comes from, is oftentimes miscommunication or poor communication. Now, simply stated, the definition of effective communication is the message sent is the message received. And that sounds so simple, but it is far from simple. The cause of conflict is that's miscommunication or poor communication can be when we're simply not communicating directly with each other. Or maybe we are gossiping to others about the person with whom we have a conflict, but we're not even giving that person the chance to know how we feel or what we're observing. Or we can communicate and we can let emotions get in the way. If you've ever heard of something called the amygdala hijacked, that's when our emotions take over. And it keeps our prefrontal cortex from working properly, because we just come from a place of anger or irritation or frustration, and that can really create poor communication. Or we do have a conversation, but then we walk away without confirming that there really is a shared understanding of the conversation. So a quick example is, maybe the employee might not have clearly communicated the specific tasks or duties expected from the volunteer. And due to this lack of clarity, the volunteer might have misunderstood their responsibilities, and that leads to confusion and conflict between the two. The second cause of conflict can be limited resources. So who on the call has more than enough resources you could ever want? You've got all the space in the world, all the money, all the help, all the blankets, all the food, all the medical supplies. You've got all the community support. I doubt it. I doubt it. So this is a cause of conflict that we can all understand. And an example might be that the animal shelter might have limited resources. Maybe that is a shortage of space for new animals or a scarcity of certain supplies. And that scarcity could lead to a conflict between an employee and the volunteer. For example, if they both have different ideas on how to prioritize or allocate those limited resources, that can be a cause. A third cause are power struggles. Sometimes our egos are such that we want to win no matter what. We don't care what carnage is left behind. It's my way or the highway. We want to flex our muscles. We want to prove our position, whatever it might be. And I'm not saying that we do this consciously. Oftentimes we do things that maybe we aren't proud of, but we may not even be aware of. Here's an example. Maybe the employee who holds an official position at the shelter or rescue might feel that their authority is being undermined by a volunteer who takes it upon themselves to make decisions without consulting the employee. And so that power struggle can result in a conflict over who has the final say in shelter-related matters. I remember seeing that many times on both sides of the coin. A fourth of our 5 causes of conflict are different values and beliefs. I know that each of us is as unique as a snowflake, and that's really what makes us very special. But it is also the source of potential conflict, because we can hold certain values and beliefs so deeply, so close to our heart, and those values and beliefs drive our behavior. And sometimes they're in conflict with others' values and beliefs. So an example might be that the employee and volunteer, they might have differing beliefs on animal care. For example, the employee might prioritize strict adherence to shelter policies, while the volunteer could advocate for a more relaxed approach because that's their personal beliefs about animal welfare. And that contrast could lead to disagreements and conflicts. And then finally, historical grievances. We have a past with someone. So when we work or volunteer together long enough, we have a history together. We have memories, we have experiences to look back on, and those are positive or negative. But when they're negative, we can let those experiences creep back in and define how we're seeing a present circumstance. For an example, the employee might hold resentment towards volunteers based on past experiences. Maybe the previous volunteer made a mistake that had serious consequences at the shelter. And that historical grievance could cause tension and conflict between the employee and the new volunteer, even if the new volunteer had nothing to do with the past incident. So these different sources of conflict can lead to tension and discord between employees and volunteers at a shelter. And resolving conflicts might involve clear and open communication about roles and responsibilities, finding common ground on our values, recognizing that past issues are creeping in and to try not to let them dictate present interactions, and ultimately aiming for that more collaborative approach. And by the way, these 5 causes of conflict are at every company in every organization. They're not unique to animal welfare organizations. And why is that? Because humans are involved. And despite our many differences and unique qualities, we're all wired pretty similarly when it comes to conflict and the way we resolve it and address it. So let's move to that. Let's talk about, now we know the causes, let's talk about our different conflict styles. So this is the way that we as individuals approach conflict. So as we're going through these various styles, think about which ones might apply to you. First one is compete or competition, competing. Individuals use this style, they tend to pursue their own concerns at the expense of others. So they might be extra assertive. They're not afraid of conflict at all. Their goal is to win the argument, win the situation, no matter what. An example might be when an employee might adopt a competing style regarding conflict by insisting that everyone follows strict shelter policies regarding animal care. For example, the employee might enforce a rule that restricts volunteers from interacting with certain animals, emphasizing the need for professionalism and compliance with shelter guidelines. And that employee may prioritize those shelter protocols over the volunteer's desire to spend extra time with the animals. So that is a competition. They won't budge. If you take that approach, oftentimes it is the my way or the highway, and you tend to not budge from what you think should happen in that conflict. I'm going to raise my hand on this one. It's happened to me many times before when I've taken the avoidance style of conflict resolution. And that means that you either evade or ignore the conflict. You just cross your fingers and you just hope it goes away, that it will resolve itself, that time will just take its course. And next time I run into that person, we won't remember it. It won't be an issue anymore. But sadly, that doesn't always happen. In an avoiding style, the volunteer might notice an issue with the way a specific animal is being cared for. But due to the fear of confrontation or causing any disruption, they may choose to overlook the problem. And the volunteer might avoid discussing concerns with the employee to prevent tension or negative interactions. Another way we approach conflict is to accommodate. And accommodate sounds on the surface like it's a good thing. But what happens with accommodation is you win at the expense of others. So accommodating tends to be like, whatever you want. I don't care, just whatever you want. And not really sharing their perspective or point of view or ideas because they want to sacrifice their own needs to satisfy the other person. And this might be when an employee acknowledges the volunteer's desire to interact more with the animals, even if it goes beyond normal procedures, and that employee might yield to the volunteer's wishes and allow more leniency, possibly neglecting the rules. And so that accommodation may not be the right solution. Sometimes we compromise, and that means we might be moderately assertive, but we're also reaching a halfway point. So I think of this one where accommodating means I lose, you win. A compromise is we both meet halfway, so we're both losing a little, gaining a little. And this might be where let's say the employee and the volunteer compromise by agreeing on specific times or tasks that the volunteer can perform within the shelter's policy. So they might negotiate a schedule or a set of duties that balance the volunteer's desire to help along with the shelter rules and requirements. So it's a compromise. And then finally, collaborate. Here's the Mac Daddy way to solve conflicts. Ideally, it's wonderful if we can collaborate. This means we're discussing openly all perspectives involved. We are actively listening to hear all sides. We are removing emotions to the extent possible, and we are working towards an agreed upon, mutually beneficial solution. So this might be where the employee and the volunteer are openly discussing the shelter guidelines, as well as the volunteer's passion for spending additional time with animals. And they can work together to find a situation where the volunteer can assist in a capacity that aligns with the shelter rules and regulations that benefit the animals. So those are the different styles of conflict. Which style do you lean towards? Some people might lean towards a particular one, and feel free to drop it in chat if one of these really resonates with you. Maybe you tend to, as I admitted sometimes, to avoid conflict no matter what. Or maybe you might go into a conflict in that competition approach. Or maybe, most likely, it depends on the situation. How much something matters to you. Is it a hill to die on, or is it something just not worth the time and effort? So Grace, thank you for sharing. I think I tend to compete or compromise. Marlene says it depends on whether or not it's a volunteer, pet owner, or employee. Excellent point. And Kristen says compromise and collaborate. Collaborate tend to be your strategy. So thank you all for sharing that. And great point. And what I love is that sense of self-awareness, because you'll hear this a lot in our training today, that we can think all day about other people, but that's not helping a situation. But when we can really look at this and say, oh my goodness, I think I tend to avoid a lot of conflict that's worth addressing, or gosh, I do tend to go in with, my authority and that I want it this way. That's great. However, you can recognize it. And then you can also work towards asking yourself the Dr. Phil question, how's that style working for you? And adjust as you need to. Oh, good. Thank you for the great comments. And Beth says, my strategy is to collaborate. Grace, I don't think I accommodate, which can make me seem like not so good of a listener. Wow, I love the honesty. That's wonderful. Okay, so how about we move right into some conflict resolution tools? So we know the causes of conflict. We know the various ways individuals tend to handle conflict. So now let's get ourselves a tool belt full of tools to resolve conflict. And depending on how you count these, there's somewhere around 5 or 6 practical tools. But my intention, no matter how simple, straightforward, easy they are, which they all are, because nobody's going to implement something that's complicated and difficult, but I want you to be able to use these right away as soon as we're done with today's webinar. And I kind of alluded to this just a moment ago with your wonderful shares in the chat. We can be here all day discussing what other people should do. Oh, if only they would follow the shelter policies. If only they would be nicer to the employees, or if only they would be kinder to our customers. But who is the only person we can change? Somebody drop that in chat. Who can we change? Well, we can exactly, Grace. Thank you. Thanks, Denise. Yes, we can only change ourselves. That's it. We can only change who we are and what we say and do. That's it. So we have to stop wasting time and energy worrying about how others should change. Maybe they should, but it's a waste of our time and energy. There is no point sitting in this discussion thinking, oh, I hope so-and-so was here, or I wish they were paying attention right now, or gosh, I think so-and-so should watch this later. That's all fine and good, and you are of course welcome to share it. But the point is that we will make more progress when we focus on the one person that we can change. And so you are here, and you're the only one that can change your behaviors to reduce unhealthy conflict in the environment. And I know that's a tough pill to swallow sometimes, and that's okay. Again, we're all human, but most likely, no matter what the conflict is or was or will be in the future, if both parties are involved in a conflict, both parties have contributed somehow. So we all own. We cannot point all the fingers externally. I would really encourage all of us in any conflict situation to first ask ourselves, what did I do to contribute to this? So just reflect long enough so you can retrace your steps. Was I not clear in my message? Did I not give them a fair shot? Was I a little hangry and so I cut them off? Was I not an effective listener? Ask yourself what you did, and then ask yourself, what can I do to resolve this conflict? It's not always 50-50, but at some level, ultimately, all parties involved in a conflict contributed somehow and or are contributing to the conflict continuing. So I really want us to focus on ourselves. And there was this analogy that I read in the book Fierce Conversations by Susan Scott. It's one of my favorite books of all time. I have got so many dog ears, pardon the pun, but in the book because it was so full of really powerful lessons. And one of the lessons that she talks about in Fierce Conversations is she asks the questions, what wake are you leaving? And the analogy is, for those of you, I'm in Florida and kind of close to the water. So, and maybe some of you are in a similar location or have been on vacation or whatever. You know what it's like when somebody driving a boat or a jet ski goes hightailing through the no wake zone. And which I always worry about the manatees in the no wake zones, or the dolphins that are getting hurt from propellers and things like that. But there's always some showboat that goes through, completely ignoring the signs, the warning that says no wake zone, slow down, manatee area. There's always some jerk who doesn't pay attention. And they hightail through the no wake zone, and then that wake, that the boat leaves all of those ripples and it's banging into the docks and it's just making a mess. And in her books, Susan Scott says, we all leave a wake. We all enter and exit a room or enter and exit a conversation. We show up to our shelter in the mornings. We pass people, we say hello. There's all of those interactions. And every time we are interacting with someone or a group of people, we are leaving a wake. And I love this analogy. It reminds us to ask ourselves, what wake am I leaving? Am I leaving a wake that is positive and uplifting and encouraging and supportive? Or am I leaving a wake that is destructive and angry and, hurtful? So I just want to share that as a tool that we can all use to resolve conflict, because it is that self-awareness and it is bringing it back to What am I doing to contribute? What wake am I leaving? And then even ask an additional question, what wake do I want to leave? All behavior is a choice. We get to choose what we say and do. It's not automatic. We make choices. And so it's really wonderful just to pause for a moment. And when you're getting ready to approach an individual, what wake do I want to leave? All right, tool number 2, and I wish this was, the acronym was PAWS, but it's pause, but not quite the way I would like it. But this is a good, again, self-awareness tool. And self-awareness is, by the way, the first part of emotional intelligence. And emotional intelligence, or EQ, is more and more over this past couple of years becoming more valuable than IQ, or emotion, or intelligent quotient, that smartness that we're born with. Emotional intelligence is, first of all, how do we understand ourselves and control our own emotions, but it's also about how we can also manage other people's emotions based on our actions. And it is a skill that can be learned and practiced and developed. So it's not something that we're either born with or not, like our IQ. And so I found this preparing for this course, and I loved it. It allows us to look through these questions and dig a little bit deeper into ourselves, asking ourselves the PAUSE. So P, pay attention to your thoughts, emotions, and body. How does your body respond to a trigger? And what do you need to do to calm down? How is your breathing? What thoughts are coming to mind? So breathing, by the way, is the best technique to de-escalate yourself and others, because it's really hard to be upset and that amygdala hijack if we're taking some deep, controlled breaths. But be aware. A is assess. What's triggering my emotions? What feelings are being triggered by that stimulus, that external thing? Do I feel abandoned? Do I feel misjudged? Do I feel disrespected? Why am I upset at the moment? Understand the cause of your emotions. What values are being challenged in this situation? Do I seek to understand and resolve this disagreement? Do I desire to maintain control over a situation? S is setting boundaries and ensuring your own safety. If you're not ready to confront the other person, feel free to step away from the conversation. If you are in a conversation and it gets heated, it's okay to call a timeout and say, you know what? We're both very emotional right now. Let's step away and come back in 10 minutes or come back tomorrow. As long as you're not using that as a delay tactic to avoid conflict, it's very appropriate, because you can't talk rationally when our emotions are in the driver's seat. And so by safety, I don't just mean physical safety, because hopefully these incidents don't escalate to that type of thing. Although I have been in situations in a shelter environment where, in the case that coming to mind, where a customer became pretty violent, but that's not what we're focusing exactly on today. But it's also psychological safety. And that is that the feeling of the environment or atmosphere where you can be yourself, you can speak freely while staying professional. And sometimes in a confrontation or a conflict, when that's no longer possible, we need to call a timeout. And then E is empathize with those involved. Put yourself in their shoes and ask yourself, how will my behavior and response affect the other person? Or how can we better communicate in a healthy way? So that's another tool. Questions or comments so far? You may even want to print this, and maybe a smaller version, so you can keep it handy and refer to, or as always, use the slides to help train others in your shelter or rescue group as well. All right, here's another tip or tool. Oh, thank you, Marlene. Marlene says she put a screenshot there. Of course. Here's another tool. It is so easy to go into a conversation starting with, you always want to change the rules. You never follow the guidelines. Why don't you stop doing what you're doing? when you start a conversation with you, let me tell you, it's like Mike Tyson in the ring. Let's put the gloves on and we're ready to go. And a quick, small change in that approach removes the gloves and creates a safe, comfortable space for engagement, interaction regarding a conflict. And it is I. We start any conversations with I. I am concerned about. I feel frustrated when. I value our relationship and I want to work through. I am confused by. I need some clarity regarding. I would appreciate it if we could talk about. I am struggling to understand. I would like to discuss my perspective on. I am seeking common ground on. I want to ensure we have a clear understanding of. I'm open to hearing your thoughts and feelings about. I'm experiencing some discomfort around. I believe it would be helpful to discuss, and I am hoping we can together work together to resolve. That's just a sampling. I didn't mean to read through all of those, but just want to get into the pattern of using I statements so that we can foster better communication and help resolve conflicts by focusing on our own feelings and needs rather than assigning blame to others. It's a small shift that we can make that will make the most positive difference in these type of situations. If you catch yourself starting off with you, it's quite all right to say, I'm sorry, let me back up. I am concerned about, or I have noticed that, or fill in the blank, but just start it off with I. Go back into your emails, because we're talking about communicating face to face, but we also, especially with shelter hours and days different, your shifts are different than others, you're probably sending a lot of email. And email is even trickier because we're only getting 7% of the message. Now, way back in the 1970s, Professor Morabian at UCLA did a study about how communication is structured, and he found that 55% of the message comes through our body language, 38% comes through our tone of voice, and only 7% comes through our words. And so when you are sending an email, you are missing 93% of the message, and it can be easily misinterpreted. Easily, people can make assumptions about emails. So go back through, maybe just your last week's worth of emails. Are there any times in there where you had an opportunity to start with I, but maybe you had started with you, and we could just make some tweaks to that? Okay, the best way to prevent unhealthy conflict is to be proactive. So to try to stop it before it even starts. And I think that one of the most powerful things that we can do that is to build or sustain, for those of you who already have a great culture, or just never lose sight of how important that culture is to reducing unhealthy conflict and just creating a fantastic environment. You all do some of the most heart-wrenching as well as the most satisfying work there is. And with that, there is a lot of emotions, but let's remember that everyone is there for the same reason. Everyone there has a heart for animals and has a heart for making a positive difference in the world. Doesn't always come across that way. And our personalities might be like, I'm not so sure that that person is here to help out. But I guarantee that they are. We all are. And having that great culture is a way to prevent unhealthy conflict. Let me just open it up to the group here. What does your organization do to either create or sustain a great culture? I'll give a moment for some responses in chat. Do you all have volunteer and employee meetings that help make sure that everyone's kept in the loop? Do you have shelter guidelines and behavior expectations? What's sometimes called ground rules? Okay, thanks, Marlene. You say to respond to pet owner complaints immediately. Terrific. That's one action of creating a great culture. And while you're thinking of it, let me go through a few, not an all-inclusive list, but Does your shelter or rescue or animal welfare organization have a defined mission and values? I know many of you do, because to be a grantee of ours, you do include that in your application. Grace says this year we started doing quarterly facts and snacks, which allows volunteer info sessions. I love it, on different topics. Fantastic. Oh my goodness, that's wonderful. Beth says acknowledge accomplishments. Wonderful. Oh, how nice. Oh, we should add these to the list when we share out the recording of this. Staff meetings that include celebrations and challenges. Terrific, terrific. Well, clearly defining that shelter or rescue organization's mission and core values is essential. And make sure that these are certainly emphasizing compassion, animal welfare, teamwork, integrity, things like that. And then it is very helpful to establish behavior guidelines. Document and discuss what are the expected behaviors, what is said and what is done within the shelter space and at shelter-related events. Establish and post these ground rules and discuss them at staff and volunteer meetings. And also recognize, as I hear you all sharing, those who do embody these guidelines. Because if a behavior occurs that doesn't align with these guidelines, it provides that neutral reference point for you to address. I noticed that you were very short with one of our customers. That's against our shelter guidelines of behavioral expectations. We need to discuss that. Strong leadership is also essential, absolutely essential, because as leaders, we set the example for the culture. We can have anything we wanted posted on the wall, or we can talk about things in meetings, but if our employees or our volunteers are looking to leadership and say, well, you don't do that, you don't follow the rule, nothing else matters. You as leaders, for those of you on the call here who are in leadership positions, you set the example. Foster open, transparent communication, respectful communication channels, whether you're having those snacks, or I got to go back to I love that, the facts and snacks or the staff meetings, and acknowledging accomplishments, wonderful. Make it comfortable for people. Provide training and development opportunities. Gray Muzzle organization provides these, and I'm sure you do them internally as well, or you reach out to other providers or vendors to make sure that everyone is learning and growing and having the skill set. You might have the heart for it, and you might not know how to do something. And so training is essential. Clear roles and responsibilities. That's part of a great culture. I understand what is expected of me as an employee in this position or as a volunteer doing this. That can avoid a lot of conflict. Encouraging collaboration, encouraging when we can work together as a team, and that everyone's contributions are essential for shelter success. Recognizing and appreciating efforts. I love it. It doesn't matter whether it's via an email, just walking past somebody and saying, way to go, love that. If you have an award board, if you do this at special events or meetings, super wonderful to have a way to recognize and appreciate people. Empower staff and volunteers. Have them take ownership of their work. Be open to suggestions for improvement. That culture of innovation and continuously improvement. I think about, when I'm dating myself, but born in the 1970s, and I look back at the 1970s versus 2023, and back in the 70s, spay and neuter really wasn't much of a thing. And now, obviously, it's something that is required if you want to adopt from most shelters and rescue groups. It's required. Or we think about the enrichment of animals and how much that has changed over the years for the better. Well, how do those things change? They change because people are coming up with ideas, and they're sharing ideas, and they're implementing them. And so that's really wonderful to have a culture that does that. Promoting inclusivity and diversity. Absolutely, making sure that all voices are heard and respected, and that the shelter reflects the community that it serves. Measure and improve. Regularly assess that shelter's culture through surveys or feedback sessions. You might use some of the free tools available if you happen to use Microsoft Outlook for your email provider, or Google Gmail. They have free polls that you can put right into the the email, take a vote on this, have a poll question. You could use SurveyMonkey, or a good old suggestion box works as well. And as I mentioned a little bit earlier, making sure that you lead by example. The shelter's leaders should consistently model the desired culture and values. All right, so best ways to prevent conflict from happening altogether. Okay, and another tool, my personal favorite, by the way, this is one of those that I had a complete paradigm shift when I was at an HR meeting. Gosh, I guess it was 5 or 6 years ago. And I heard for the first time about something called the ladder of inference. And so I'm going to have to switch slides here for just a moment. So pardon me while I stop sharing. And I've got to jump over to a new screen. Hang on just a second. I love PowerPoint, but it doesn't let you mingle landscape and portrait slides. But this is something you need to see to follow along. So let's talk about this tool called the ladder of inference. Okay, it's also called the process of abstraction. And what it does is it describes this thinking process that we go through, usually without even realizing it, to get from a fact to a decision or action. And the thinking stages we go through can be seen as rungs on a ladder. And so let's just go through, and we're going to go through a couple examples, but first let me describe it from a high-level perspective. At the bottom of the ladder, there is something that happens. We observe something. It is reality. It's facts. And then from that fact that we observe, somebody is doing something or saying something, then we filter a portion of that data. So we have what's called selected reality. And then climbing up that ladder, we interpret a piece of that selected reality. We take a piece of it and we make our own label to it. And then we make assumptions based on what we think we know, and we also add meanings to that. So it's called the assumptions piece. And then we draw conclusions. And then those conclusions update our beliefs about the world. And then we take action. And then those new beliefs change how we see the world. And there is something called a reflexive loop, which those beliefs influence what we observe going forward. I'm certain that didn't make any sense, but it will after this example. We're going to go through 2 quick examples. Here's an example. The shelter employee, Marco, observes a new volunteer, Sarah, who's working diligently and quietly cleaning cat enclosures. That's the fact. Marco sees Sarah. She's diligently cleaning the cat enclosures. Marco takes a piece of that. He selectively notices that Sarah is often reserved and tends to work independently. So he interprets that. Marco thinks to himself, you know, Sarah doesn't socialize with others. I don't think she's interested in being a team player. And then he makes assumptions. He makes assumptions that Sarah is introverted, unfriendly, and doesn't want to build relationship with others. And then he draws conclusions. Marco decides that Sarah isn't here to make friends or be a part of the shelter community. He decides she won't last because she's not committed. Changes his beliefs. Marco has adopted the belief that he doesn't like Sarah. And then he takes actions on those beliefs. He tells others about Sarah. He and others then start to exclude her from team activities, and they don't assign her roles that involve collaboration. So go walk back down that ladder. And this might be a little bit of an exaggeration, but I can tell you that I can catch myself climbing the ladder all the time. It happened this morning, and I had to say to myself, what else could be true? What else? But the fact is, Marco saw Sarah quietly, diligently cleaning cat enclosures. From that point on, everything else, and that's why there's the eyeballs, the terrible graphic there that I've created, the eyes, and then it's thoughts, and then eyes are actions again. We let ourselves fill in all of these blanks. And so you can see how he quickly went from she's cleaning the cages and she's quiet to, you know what, she's always quiet. You know, she doesn't even like to socialize with others. I don't think she's a team player. Oh, you know what? I don't think she wants to build relationships with people. She's probably not committed. I mean, we do this. So here's another example. Shelter volunteer Nick notices that the kennel cleaning checklist is not marked complete for the day. That's the facts. He looks at it, it's not marked complete. Then he selectively notices that 3 shelter employees are gathered in an office talking. He thinks to himself, huh, must be nice to have time to sit around while the kennels need cleaned. And then he makes assumptions that the team is simply chit-chatting and not discussing important shelter operations or animal care. Nick concludes that the shelter employees give the volunteers all the grunt work. And he adopts the belief that staff takes advantage of volunteers and doesn't appreciate their value. And all of those thoughts lead him to take an action. And he decides he's going to quit being a volunteer. But he doesn't give anyone any reason for actions. And so this can be the source of conflict, and it can be a source for us to say time out at any point. And again, this one might seem like a little bit of an exaggeration, but I don't think it is that much of an exaggeration once we're aware of it. So let's go back down through it real quick. Nick notices the checklist isn't complete to clean the kennels. And then he sees some shelter employees talking. He has no idea what they're talking about. No idea. But he decides in his own head that they're just chit-chatting. And then you see how that spirals. Okay, so this ladder of inference, it's a great thing for us to be aware of because we climb it, others climb it. So let's talk about how we can use this as a conflict management tool. Very simply, we can stop ourselves or each other at any point when we recognize we're climbing the ladder. And you know, we can refer to the ladder at any stage of our thinking process and ask the questions in a moment. Ask yourself too, what rungs of the ladder do you tend to jump? Do you make assumptions easily? Do you select only certain data? So just ask yourself these questions or ask each other. So that's why there's a you, me, you, I here. What belief led you to take this action? Why did you draw that conclusion? Is that conclusion sound? What else could be true? So in this case, Marco, what else could be true about Sarah? Maybe she's just, you know, a hard worker and she's just keeping to herself to get her tasks done. Well, what else could be true? Maybe Sarah, no one's been talking to Sarah and inviting her to, you know, feel included. Well, what else could be true? There's so many things that could explain her behavior, but oftentimes we let our assumptions become what we think are facts, and that creates conflict. So you can ask yourself, what is my source of information? And in this case, if Marco would have just went back, said, well, my source is I observed her diligently and quietly cleaning cat enclosures. Okay, so maybe there's other pieces that could be true. So this is just an awareness, and I hope you found this valuable as a way to understand conflict and as a way that we can ultimately stop conflict because we can help each other recognize when we are climbing that ladder of inference. And let me go back to the other screen. So that's a really important tool. And another thing that would be helpful to share with other employees and volunteers, because then we can hold each other accountable. I know in my workplace, my teammates, we talk about the ladder of inference, and I have more than once had one of my direct reports say, Kelly, you're climbing the ladder. And I'm like, thank you, you're right, let me climb back down. I'm making assumptions, and assumptions are rarely, first of all, they're rarely helpful, and they're also rarely true. So let's try to stop those assumptions. Here's just a quick conflict resolution worksheet, and then we've got a case study or two before we wrap up. So first of all, ask yourself, what is the problem that I am having? Why is it a problem? Whose problem is it? What have I already tried to remedy the problem? What is my end goal? What are the 5 ways that I could achieve that end goal? And of those 5 ways, what 2 options would work best? I think this brings in a lot of Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. What is my end goal is habit 2, begin with the end in mind. So what am I trying to, what do I hope at the end of this conflict? When this conflict is resolved, what do I want the other person or us to know, think, feel, or do? Well, what are the various ways I could approach this to get to that end goal? And what is the best way? And then here's just a simple script. And I don't like that word script because I know you want to sound authentic and genuine. But I also know that if you are like me, who can get uncomfortable in conflict situations, it is helpful to practice ahead of time, to think it through ahead of time, to spend a few moments just jotting things down. There is nothing wrong with that, because preparing, you prepare when something is important. And I think these conversations are absolutely important. So it makes sense to prepare for them. And so there's a little bit of a script that you can use as a template in addressing conflict. But it's completely flexible, and tweak the wording however you would like. Here's the template. I feel, and then state what you're feeling. When, state the behavior. Because, let them know why the behavior hurts or bothers you. I would appreciate it if, then fill in the blank. So this is an example. I feel frustrated when you look at your phone while we're talking, because it seems like you're not paying attention or interested in what I'm saying. I would appreciate it if you would leave your phone in your pocket so we can have a productive conversation. Hear all the I's. So maybe tweak the wording and imagine that you are addressing staff and volunteers at an all-hands meeting, and there's a lot of side conversation. There's a lot of sidebars happening. You might say, using the same template, but just tweaking it, hold on, please. Can we all come back together for just a moment? I am concerned that we're not actively listening to one another because we all have a voice and we deserve to be heard. I would appreciate it if you would please listen to the person speaking and not conduct side conversations. Thank you. Just a quick way to bring everybody back together and resolve that conflict. All right. So far, so good, everyone. All right, let's get a couple of case studies here that we might take a look at. The top part is the scenario. So imagine an employee and volunteer have differing opinions on the feeding regimen for a group of cats. The employee follows the shelter's established guidelines, while the volunteer insists on a different approach, believing it's better for the cat's health. This conflict centers around animal welfare and care standards. And so in the interest of time, we're going to go ahead and go through what's suggested. But in this situation, we want to make sure that both employees and volunteers do have the training on the shelter's standard operating procedures for animal care. And that's feeding, the guidelines, medication administration, health assessments. That's a common ground, ensuring that everyone is aware of the SOPs. Then second piece is open communication. Encourage open and constructive communication between the two groups, employees and volunteers. Provide everyone a platform to discuss concerns and suggestions. And I love hearing that many of you do this. If a conflict persists, maybe you need to involve either a trained mediator or some other neutral third party to come in and navigate the conversation. There's nothing wrong with that. Sometimes we're just going to work with someone that we just don't gel with, no matter how much we try, how much they try. It's not personal. It's just, gosh, we just don't click. So, but we still need to resolve this conflict. So maybe bringing somebody else in is understandable. An employee and a longtime volunteer are on opposite sides of a decision regarding a potentially expensive medical procedure for an injured dog. I'm sure you have seen this. The employee is focused on the shelter's budget constraints, while the volunteer strongly advocates for doing whatever it takes to save the dog. So this is a tough one, but being proactive, and maybe as part of your culture, you have developed clear decision-making structure that outlines who has the final say in various types of decisions, especially those involving significant financial or medical matters. I know at the shelter that I worked at, we had a small committee that included people from medical, included people from operations, and a volunteer to openly discuss and just make a decision on a situation like this. You could also implement a consultation process where employees and volunteers have the opportunity to provide input on that important decision. That makes sure that mutual perspectives are considered before a final choice. And then also, what's very helpful for this or other situations is to create a conflict resolution process. So, in other words, if you don't already, maybe as part of your standard operating procedures for the environment, you create one about how to properly address conflict and provide a healthy strategy and guidelines to follow. And then finally, the shelter is organizing a large adoption event, and there's a dispute between an employee and volunteer about task allocation. The employee may feel that the volunteers are not taking on their fair share of responsibilities, while the volunteer might argue that they're not given meaningful tasks. All right, so what do? Maybe we have in advance created a comprehensive task list for either specific events or daily operations, and that clear responsibilities are assigned to both employees and volunteers. Here's those regular meetings, making sure that you discuss task allocations and volunteer roles. There's a theme to some of these preventative measures that involve documentation and open communication. And then there we have the recognition and appreciation, making sure that both employees and volunteers are appreciated for their contributions. All right, everyone. Well, in our short time today, we talked about the root causes of conflict and our various conflict styles. And then we took a look at several tools in how we can either prevent conflict, unhealthy conflict from happening, or to resolve it when it does happen. And so we looked at I statements, we looked at the ladder of inference and stopping ourselves from climbing it. We looked at many ways to create or maintain a positive shelter culture. We have our PAUSE, P-A-U-S-E acronym that we can look at. We've got a template and a mini worksheet for us to work through. So I hope that those were providing you with several tools that you can use to help reduce unhealthy conflict. And I hope you found that today's content valuable. And I want to take a moment before I turn it over to Denise to thank you so much for all that you do day in and day out to save and improve the lives of very special senior dogs, but all other very deserving dogs, cats, bunnies, gerbils, birds, and all of the other furry and feathered friends who, thanks to you, get that second or third or fourth shot at life, love, health, and happiness.
I ditto you, Kelly, on that. Everything you said for all of the hard work that our grantees do. And I want to thank you because I'm going to try not to climb that ladder in our board meetings or anywhere else. I was thinking about it, and I'm going to jump to the conclusion that Sarah was probably the hardest working volunteer of all, and that the others didn't show up that day, and she had to do all of the cat kennels by herself. So, anyway. That's often what does happen. But I think this was so informative, Kelly, because I have come across so many people in life in the animal world who say they don't want to work with people. They are fed up with people. That's why they're working with animals. But of course, to help the animals, who do we have to work with? The people. And, those conflicts do arise. So we just cannot thank you enough. And if anybody watching in the recording has questions, please, reach out to Amanda at Gray Muzzle, and she'll direct your questions to Kelly, who has already eagerly said she'd be happy to answer anything. But I hope you took screenshots. If not, when you go ahead and watch the recording again when it's available and take those screenshots, because some of those graphics were really, really important and informative.
And I would be happy to share PDF versions also, if that's helpful.
Thank you, Kelly. Well, from the bottom of all our gray muzzle hearts, thank you for joining in and for what you do every day. And I hope we'll see you at the next monthly webinar. Bye-bye, everyone. And thank you, Kelly.
Thank you all so much. Have a happy Thanksgiving.